Today on Piano Takes, we're looking at the fundamentals of scales. We'll learn how they're built, we'll see the major and minor modes and how they relate to each other. We'll learn some terminology like tonic and diatonic and chromatic. And we'll take a look at the circle of fifths and see how you can actually use that to derive all 12 major scales. Finally, we'll answer the question, what happens if you take the tune I'm a Little Teapot and cross it with Hatikvah and Mozart? Let's take a look. So let's say one day you wake up and you decide to write a song, but for some reason you've never actually heard the song I'm a Little Teapot, and so without knowing it, you're actually writing pretty much identical opening to I'm a Little Teapot. And so you have your beginning and you go, I'm a little teapot, short and stout, here is my handle and here do. And you think, that last note really isn't working there. But you're not sure why. Well, the first thing to realize about that tune is that it's written in a particular scale. The way I just played it, that was in the C major scale. So if you listen to the first notes of the tune, it goes... You notice those are all the white keys that I'm using there. You're pretty much outlining the C major scale, the major scale that starts on C. The notes that are in that scale, in other words, in this case, the white notes, those are called diatonic notes. In other words, these. The notes that are outside of the scale, in this case, the black keys, those are the chromatic notes. So, simple guidance, you're writing a tune, stay in the scale. You don't have to all the time, certainly, but if you want it to kind of sound satisfying, I guess maybe a simple rule of thumb is stay in the scale. Okay, so you go back and you say, all right, I realize now my mistake. I took this chromatic note, whereas I should have stuck with a diatonic note, like any of these. Okay, so you try again. You say, I'm a little teapot, short and stout. I'm done. It's better than it was before, but that doesn't really feel like an ending there. It feels like, okay, maybe it's a continuation. There's a little more to say. It doesn't quite feel like home yet. That's because in this particular piece, a home note was sort of chosen. The home note would be C. It started on C, you notice. And it kind of feels like you want to come back to that C. Now it feels complete. So now we realize why the tune didn't quite sound right. We need to come back to tonic, and that'll give us that feeling of resolution. So now it sounds like... This is the tonic note, C, and now it feels like the tune is complete. So the note that you pick as your home base is called the tonic. In this case, we used C as our tonic. Now, one thing to notice about the C major scale, or any major scale, is that the notes are actually not uniform distance from each other. You notice you start with C, you go to the D and the E here. Each of these notes has this sort of half step that you're skipping. In other words, you're taking a whole step when you go from here to here, and you're taking a whole step when you go from here to here. But now this next one, you're taking a half step. That's built right into the scale, this inconsistent step size, that some of them are whole steps and some of them are half steps. And right here is another half step. What that means is you could try playing the same tune, but from a different starting point, and you're going to get a very different flavor or feeling to that tune because the step sizes are not going to be the same as they were before. So for example, the most common alternate starting place would be on the sixth note of the scale. So here we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If we now start on this sixth note, which by the way is the same as traveling down by 3. If we went from this C and we just traveled down 3, 1, 2, 3, either way you end up on an A. Now, if we took the same set of steps and jumps that made up our tune starting from C, But now we do the same thing starting from A, you end up with this. You hear how it sounds different? That's actually the minor scale. The minor scale is actually always 3 steps down from the major scale, or 6 steps up from the major scale. So any major scale you have, you can figure out the minor by just going down 3 steps. And conversely, any minor scale, you can figure out the major by just going up 3 steps. And so just by putting that tune into the minor mode, it changes the character so much that to me it even starts to sound like the old Jewish tune Hatikvah. And for that matter, it's pretty similar to Mozart's minor variation in the Twinkle Twinkle song. So when you choose one of the notes in the major scale to be your tonic, you're actually choosing a mode. So when you choose the first note, this forms the major mode. That's why it's called a major scale. And when you choose the 6th note, that's the minor mode. But you could also choose other notes as your tonic, and those form other modes that are less commonly used. Starting on the 4th note is called Lydian. It's not as common. It's often used for whimsical effect in movies and such. Like the Simpsons theme song is... that's the Lydian scale. And starting on the 3rd note, 1, 2, 3, that's called Phrygian. And the fact that it starts right off with a half step, that is sometimes by extension, just the term Phrygian is used to refer to any time you start your scale off with a half step like that. But anyway, the most common scales to know are the major and minor. So now you're feeling pretty good about your song. You decide you're going to skip the minor. It was a little too dark. You're going to bring it back into major. And now you take it to a singer. And the singer is like, oh, great, sounds good. This singer also has never heard I'm a Little Teapot. Singer thinks it's totally brilliant and original. And the singer says, C, it's kind of a low key for me. Can we at least just bring it up to F? And so you think, F, what, you want to sing it in Lydian? That's going to sound really weird. I'm a little teapot. I don't think that's going to work. And the singer says, no, I didn't mean that. I meant, let's, instead of transposing it in that loose way, where you're keeping all the notes diatonic to the scale, how about let's just actually change the scale so that all the intervals are exactly the same as they were before, so that it would sound like this, starting on F. So why did we have to lower the B there? Well, remember the sound of a major scale. If we go back to the C major for a second, remember the major scale sound is that sequence of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half step. So if we're starting from F, we need to have a whole, whole, and now we need a half step here. But if we simply stayed within the white keys like we did for C major, we would end up with this another whole step there, which gives you the Lydian sound, which is not what we're looking for. We're not looking for Lydian sound, we're looking for the major sound. So in order to preserve that sequence of whole and half steps, the only way to do that starting from F would be to go whole, whole, half, which means the lowered B there, then whole, 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 half. And now F is our tonic, and we say this is the F major scale. So F major is the only major scale that has exactly one flat in it, just like C major was the only major scale that has no flats and no sharps in it. And everything that we said about the modes of C major is also true for the modes of F major. For example, in F major, you could travel down by 3 steps, 1, 2, 3, and then you get the D minor scale using the same notes as F major, but just starting from 3 steps lower. That's the minor mode from F major. And that relationship is actually called the relative minor. So when you say the relative minor of F major, that would be D minor. The relative minor of C major would be A minor. And conversely, the relative major of A minor would be C major. And the relative major of D minor would be F major. So it actually turns out if you take any of the 12 tones that exist, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and of course here we're back to C where we started again, it repeats after that. If you take any of those starting notes and build a major scale off of it, you're going to get a unique number of sharps or flats for that scale. No other scale will have the same number of sharps and flats. And there's actually a pattern to those sharps and flats, which makes it a lot easier to learn. And let me show you how that pattern looks. Starting with C major, no sharps, no flats. Travel to the 4th tone, 1, 2, 3, 4, and sharp it. Then your 5th tone will be your new scale. G major has this sharp in it. G major is the only scale that has 1 sharp in it. Now repeat that process. I'm going to take the G down here. I'm going to travel 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to sharp it. And then the 5th note will be your next scale. This is D major. D major is the only scale that has 2 sharps in it. It has the same sharp that G had in it, which is this, but it also has this. So D major is like this. You repeat that process again and again. So here we go to the 4th note. We're going to sharp it. Now you get A major, which now has 3 sharps in it. The same 2 that D major had, plus this additional sharp. So A looks like. And now I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to do the same thing again. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to sharp this guy, and then take the 5th. This is E major, which has 4 sharps in it. Same process again. I'm going to travel down here to this E. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sharp it. Now you have B major, 5 sharps. And now that we have 5 sharps, you might say, surely that's as far as we can go, because we've already used up all the black keys here. There are no more sharps. Not true. You start sharping the white keys. So you take B major and you go and take, this should be the 4th. We're going to sharp it. It becomes this. And we get, and now the 5th note is our new scale. This is F sharp major, which is, there's that sharped white note, and that's F sharp major. And then finally, from F sharp major, you can actually come all the way over to 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to sharp it. So, and then come to C sharp major. C sharp is actually the same shape as D flat major, because C sharp, you can see it's the same note as D flat, and so you could just learn D flat instead of C sharp when we get to the flats, which is what we're going to do next. So the opposite of adding sharps would be taking away sharps or adding flats. You basically take the same process in reverse. So let's take, for example, the first one we derived, which was G major. Remember, we determined that this thing gets sharped because we started with C major and we sharped the 4th to produce G major. Well, if you reverse that process, you'll see in G major, that's actually the 7th note of G major. And so what we're going to do is take the 7th and lower it by half a step. And then we're going to go down by 5 steps instead of up. So G major, we're going to, instead of playing the sharped 7th there, we're going to go natural 7, in other words, down half step, and then come down 5 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That brings us to C major. Now you just keep going right on past that. In C major, we this should be the 7th, but we're going to flatten it and then continue on down 5 steps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That brings us to F major, which is the only key that has 1 flat in it, this guy. And then you do the same thing here again. Instead of playing this, we're going to lower that 7th by half a step, and that takes you to B flat major, which is the only key that has 2 flats in it. And notice, just like on the sharps, each next step was sort of it included all the same sharps as the previous one. Same is true on the way down. B flat major has the same flats that F major had, which is this guy, plus 1 more, which is this one. So you've got this. And now doing the same thing again, we take the 7th but flatten it and go down 5 steps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have E flat major, which has 3 flats. And now the same process, take the 7th, flatten it, A flat major, and then flatten this thing, and then down 5 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. D flat major, which you'll see, as you recall, that's the same starting note as we talked about C sharp major. So this is really the same thing. I prefer to think of it as D flat major because that's only 5 flats. It's less to remember, I guess. And then you can actually continue this process and take this and lower it by half step and go. That gives you G flat major, which is actually the same thing as F sharp major, which we already covered earlier. And really, when I think of these scales, I kind of visualize them as shapes. You know, like with G major, I think of it as this straight sweep up with this little hiccup at the end. Kind of like if you took a square root symbol and you sort of rotated it 180 degrees so that the little dip was at the top right instead of the bottom left. Likewise with D major, I sort of think of these 2 mountain peaks, like here's one and here's another. And so I think visualizing them in that way can be very helpful. And I would suggest practicing those in the exact order that we just went through them, because in that way you're also learning the circle of fifths. You notice those 5th relationships. Those are great to know because those are the most closely related keys. When you're in F major, it's great to know that by adding 1 flat, you're going to get B flat major, and by taking away a flat, you're going to get C. It means that when you're playing in F major, it's you can almost expect, it's very common that you might go to C or you might go to B flat major. And once you're comfortable with all 12 major scale shapes, you'll have a much easier time playing the song in any key. Someone says, hey, let's play it in A flat. Sure. They say, oh, actually, no, how about let's try it in F minor? And you know, well, F minor, go up 3. That's the relative major is the A flat major. So you know, okay, it's basically an A flat major scale, but using the 6th tone as the start. So it's the minor mode, and you come up with. And you can even start changing the scale right during the piece itself. For example, you could start in C minor and then switch to D major and finish in G minor, which would sound like. So knowing these scales really well opens up a lot of possibilities. And finally, before we go today, here's what happens when you cross I'm a Little Teapot with Hatikvah and Mozart all at the same time. So that's it for today, but there's a lot more fun stuff coming up in the next video. I'm Ari Kast, this is Piano Takes, and I hope to see you in the next video.